just some background from this pot of funding. So this is a £50,000 pot of funding that we're going to be giving out over the next couple of months. We are doing this in partnership with John Lyons Charity. What they agreed is, even though they've supported a lot of local charities and organisations, because of the way they fund and who they can fund, they can't obviously give grants to everyone. So this funding is specifically there for those that haven't had a grant from John Lyons, especially if you've not had a main grant. If you've had a holiday grant, you can still apply to this. And just to be clear, anyone can apply to this, but we have to give priority to those that haven't received, just due to either you're not a registered charity, which might be the reason, or other restrictions for a reason that you've not had a main grant off John Lyons. And so they're going to be part of this process, getting to know some of the organisations, and hopefully over the long term, maybe giving you other grants kind of in the years to come, but we'll see how that goes. The other thing is, I've just put it there, and I think that's just going with the John Lyons. We are trying to create funds that give small and really vital to their local community organisations just a little bit more visibility to some of the larger funders, which is why this grant has been great, because it just gives us the opportunity to do this. I'm going to hand over to Keisha to go through some of the guidance on this grant, and then I'm going to come back and look at the application.
Okay, hi everyone. So my name is Keisha. Most of you should know me. The applications have gone out. They went out yesterday. So if for any reason you're watching this on the replay and you have not got that, please do contact me. My name is Keisha Njoku, so the email should be there. So the aim is to fund around 60 member organizations. So we're giving out a range of grant between 2,000 and 5,000. What I'd like you to remember and think carefully about is being realistic about the amount you apply for. So although it says here, think carefully about the size of the grant in relation to your turnover, what it's really saying is be realistic. So if we get a huge amount of applications coming through and you've put a huge amount of money that you're applying for that doesn't really correlate with what the activities that you're going to be able to run, and can you really manage that amount? Just be able to explain very clearly what you need the funds for, and don't over subscribe and say you want the full 5,000 when you're one of the smaller organizations. So we don't want a case where we're going to have to reduce the amount we give you. So just be realistic with that. So that's the main thing I want you to think about there. Okay, can we move on? Okay, so the overall aim, and this was a question that came through, one of the questions that came through before on the SurveyMonkey, was the overall aim is to basically create a meaningful, lasting impact on the lives of children and young people across Harrow. So we're supporting both new and existing programs. Yeah, so it must clearly address the need and help with or capacity building and adverse effects of COVID-19. So, and then just to be clear about the duration. So once we've gone through the process and taken in all the application forms, they are coming to me. So when they come in, the whole process should hopefully be finished by December, early December. So if you wanted to use the money and start the program in December, if you had time before Christmas, then you're welcome to do that. But I can imagine that most programs will probably start in January and be finished by the end of June. So just to let you know, this is not a year-long funding as previous. It's a shorter window because of reporting purposes. So that's just to make you aware of that. Okay. All right, so these are I don't know if you guys should have already be aware of the 5 priority area needs that we had last year, and we've had our new review, we had our Hey Harrow review. And so that these are the 5 areas that the goal areas that we're concentrating on are slightly different, but not too different. But I just wanted to make you aware, this is what we're focusing on. And these were based on a survey from direct responses of children and young people in Harrow. So as you know, mental and emotional well-being was there before, physical activity is there. There was a question that came through about, can we deliver sports activities? Yes, you can, because it's one of our goal areas. It depends obviously what it is, but yeah, in general, you can do. That was a question that came through. The safety has slightly changed. We focused last time mostly on youth violence, and now it's called safety, and it's focusing on and including exploitation, risky behavior, harassment, bullying, and gangs. The inequalities is the same, except that we're focusing on poverty, a particular focus on poverty. And then young people's future, before it was something around employment, but this time the focus is slightly different. It's just about their futures, including employment and their aspirations. So just to make you aware, when you're thinking of applying, it must fall within one of these areas. Okay, thank you. All right, and lastly, I would just like to really encourage you to read the guidance that I've sent through. Again, if you haven't received it, because I've only sent it out to members, and if for some reason you didn't get it or you can't open it, just let me know, and I'll resend that to you. But please read the eligibility guidance, because if you're going to apply, we don't want you to waste your time and you didn't read the guidance and there's something on there that means you're not eligible. So one of the things that Dan's already mentioned, again, we said that priority is given to those who have not received funding from John Lyons Charity before. That's priority. It doesn't mean it's completely excluded, but that's there. And also, Asia is going to be going over some of the policies and things that we'd like you to have in place for funding for now, but also for future funding. So if you can be aware of those, they're on there, the risk assessments. I'm not going to go over them because Ashley's going to take over from me in a moment to do that. But please be aware of all of these things. As I'm speaking, just please scan through this. I believe someone said, is these slides going to be available? I'm sure they will, and we can make those available. Thank you.
They will be available, but just to clarify, everything that's in these slides is either in the guidance notes or the application form. We've pretty much tried to carbon copy it just so there's no differences. So you should have everything that's here. Obviously, it's just, and we'll add this video so that everyone can have it. Before I just quickly look at the application form, just to clarify, at the bottom of your screen, you should have a Q&A option. If you've got any questions you'd like to ask us, we're going through either about the guidance or about this application form, then please just put it in the Q&A. Obviously, you can use the chat as well to say hi to people, but please, if it's possible, please use the Q&A for questions just so it's easier to answer them. If you haven't got any, or if you want to specifically ask us something, then you can email us and we'll get back to you about whatever question if it's very, very targeted the question. Okay, so let's look at the application. We haven't changed our application very much. We continue to try and make it as simple as possible. So the first kind of section you'll find, the first section is about you as an organization, your name, kind of those kind of things. So obviously answer that. This is the first main question. Obviously, some of these are kind of non-negotiable, so you do have to be a member of ours. You do have to have activities on our portal now. It's part of our agreement that we have as a membership from this point on, because we do want all our members to have something public that young people can come along to. We do need to know if you've had grants off JLC or if you're currently holding a main grant. Again, we aren't saying that we're definitely not funding anyone, but this is supposed to be trying to help those organizations that haven't had larger grants off them before. And do you have the policies in place? So that's a really easy section. Then go on to this. As much as possible, please try not to be really broad. So for instance, the mental health and emotional health and well-being, if that's something that you specifically target with young people, please tick yes. But if you don't, then please feel free to say no. We really only need to see at least one of these areas ticked. We don't need to see all of them, but all the ones you tick, we're trying to understand why you've ticked it throughout the rest of the application. So only tick them if that is something that you are wanting to make change through the young people you're supporting. Okay, moving on. Have you received funding from us before? This is just so it makes it easier on our due diligence process. If you say no, obviously, we come back to you a couple of times before the grants panel to make sure all our due diligence is in process. If you have received grants before us, then on our system, we would be able to just check some of that. So it just reduces your workload. But obviously, if you've not, then tick yes. Over the past 2 years, tell us what you've been doing over the pandemic. what we're looking for here, because this is in partnership with John Lyons and the council and other people, we are looking to understand what you've delivered over the last period of time, because we know some of you have been doing some quite unique or quite specific work that hasn't had the kind of limelight for people to understand what you're doing. So this helps us understand what your experience is in general, but especially over the COVID, because we're expecting a blended approach over the next kind of 6 months, which is this funding period is going to be. So your experience over the last 2 years will help the panel know what kind of experience you're going to be able to put into action over the next 6 months. Then tell us about your project. Please don't feel you've got to write us a whole essay. It's 500 words max. We put those word limits on so to encourage you don't have to tell us everything and anything you're going to do. But please be specific enough so that someone that has no idea about your organization can kind of understand what you're wanting to do. So for instance, if you're going to run a open youth club, let's say, then just telling us that you're going to open on this night and you're going to be open for young people won't be enough. We'd want to be seeing what kind of activities, how do we know the young people are going to like it? How are they getting involved? How will it be developing over the period of time? So be specific enough, but don't feel like you've got to tell us everything. Hopefully that makes sense. If you need more if you need to touch base with Keisha or anyone else from the team, please do. If you want to just run the idea past us, we do try and get a very high success rate. So we'd rather chat with everyone first so that people reduce any kind of wasted time, but our success rate currently is really high. It's about 90% that those who are applying are being successful, just due to us having those conversations before and reducing people's wasted time. When will the grant start? When will the grant finish? You may be doing, let's say, a course of 6 weeks or of 6 sessions. You might use the whole 6 months, but please be specific here, because obviously this is a time period grant. So we just need to know when you're going to be starting, when you're going to be finishing, and how many sessions is this going to include. This which reduces the risk of confusion, because it might be, I don't know, a 10 sessions program, but over 2 weeks. And because most people only do 1 session a week, it may not be clear if you put 2 weeks that actually you're going to be doing all those extra things. So that's why we specifically asked that. And then obviously we aren't needing you to do a Google research on children and young people in Harrow. Through the needs analysis, we've got that. What we're trying to find out from this question is, who are the young people you're supporting and what are the needs they're struggling with? So please be specific. Please show how the panel, how you know those young people. What have they struggled with over COVID? What are the kind of key things for them? Or the young people that you're going to be working with? What are the specific areas that are there that you can help with? Please don't just link some Google kind of stats on here, because it really doesn't help your application. So please be specific. Some basic ones: how many young people? What are the age groups? Obviously, this is a prediction. We're not going to be holding you 100% to this, but be as accurate as possible. Then your outcomes, we only have to have 1. You can have up to 4. We try and encourage people not to have more than 4. Please be specific and make sure this is an outcome, not an output. So just to clarify, I'm sure that you're totally aware of that, but an output would be, this is the amount of people that are coming to this thing. The outcome would be, we have seen 60% of our young people that come to this course grow in confidence or reduce in risky behavior or whatever it is, then just think that through. Again, if you need to touch base with Keisha or someone else on the team, please feel free to do so, just in case you're confused. VAR also help think through your outcome measuring and kind of helping you think through some of that. So if you're completely new to grant kind of funding and really want to help with your outcome structure, then please get hold of VAR. And especially through the Black Lives Matter, but we've always encouraged this last question is we want to know what your equality and diversity is for this program, and how do we know that you're promoting this in a way that all young people can get access to this support, and that it isn't closed for a very specific group of people. This is a key one because John Lyons want to see a case study from each organisation, which is why this is a specific new question. So you would need to just be confirming that you would be looking for one case study with permission from that child, and if they're under 16, from their parents, so that if John Lyons want to advertise the great work you're doing, they would be able to do that. So that's just that last one. The budget, so obviously it's kind of a key one if you're asking for any amount of funding. On this grant, we're not being really specific, or we're not controlling what you ask for. So if you've, let's say, got the staff to deliver something, but you just don't have the money for resources, and you want to put all that funding into resources, you can do that, or into activities. You could put it all into overheads. We're not saying you can't, but we are specifically, probably with the people on the panel, I think they'll want to be making sure that they're funding activities or staff or resources to deliver more for children and young people through this grants pot specifically. So put on a percentage. In my years doing fundraising, I would always expect to see a 15 to 20% overheads, because from your admin, from your insurance, from your building costs, from your rentals, things like that, we know that they cost money. So we wouldn't be surprised if we see that kind of percentage, but be specific. So for instance, if you say, I don't know, let's say you go for £5,000 and you're doing 3 sessions, and you just put here, we want £5,000 for staff time, the panel is probably going to be really confused how £5,000 breaks up into 3 sessions. It's going to be very hard to understand what that looks like. So if you were to do something like that, you really would need to be clear that it might be about the preparation. It might be, what are the hours? How much does it cost to have those workers? Things like that. So please be specific and think about it from someone that doesn't know you, doesn't know what you're delivering, and is trying to help understand how they can give you this funding. So as long as there's enough information here, then we're not against what you asked for. But just be specific. And then the reason why there's a total requested, because some of you might want to include some of the things you know that there's going to be a cost there, but you've already got that covered. But we do need to know specifically here, what are you asking for from this grant? And Keisha, do you want to finish off with the...
Yeah, so just to say, the deadline is 12 noon on Monday, the 11th of October. So please, if you could, as Dan said before, if you need help with the application form, you want me to have a look at it before it goes to panel, try to get it in early, maybe a couple of weeks early, so I can have a look, give you some feedback, and then give you some time to submit it again before we hand it over to the panel. But the final deadline is on Monday, the 11th of October at 12 noon. And all submissions should be emailed directly to me at this address. So YHF grants, not to my normal address. So YHF grants at youngharrow.org. And you'll be notified at least 3 weeks after submission. And like I said before, you can start as early as December, so long as we've got everything going. In terms of monitoring and evaluation, if you're accepted, you'll be notified about that, but it's not going to be much different to what you see on the application form. We don't normally ask anything we haven't put on there, but it's just basically about how the project has run. But I will send that to you as you have. If you get an offer, if you get through, you'll get that information about monitoring and evaluation and what to expect before you start the project. So I think we're just going to hand over through to Asia, who's going to take you through some of the policies.
And so, just before, and kind of as we do that, just so everyone's aware why we've put this into this webinar. Obviously, we've been giving a lot of grants out throughout COVID, and especially over the summer. What we've seen is there are some really common threads coming through, that because we as a funder are relational, so we'll work with you. Not all funders are, and John Lyons Charity will be sitting on this panel. And if it gets to that position and little things aren't quite right, then decisions may not go away that we would love to help them. So Asia, who as Volunteers Narrow, if you don't know Volunteers Narrow, we'd love you to join them as well, so they can offer you the support. So Asia, do you want to quickly, in case anyone here doesn't know, which I think you know everyone except for maybe one of the people here, do you want to give them a little bit of what you've been doing in your organisation, and then reflect on the policy and the things that you've noticed over the last kind of couple of years?
Definitely. Thank you, Dan. Morning, everybody. It's still morning. So yes, I've been doing quite a lot of policy support over the COVID period, and I found that actually in terms of the support we provide at Voluntary Action, so you've got monitoring support, and you've also got policy support, and you've got startup support. So there's a difference in services that we provide within Voluntary Action Harrow. The main area that I focus on particularly is around policy support, and some of the areas that we've got concerns over the last year and a half, 2 years nearly, are definitely around issues that have come up when people are completing policies, and also around other areas, which I'm going to kind of talk to you about as well. So in terms of policy support, when you look at your current deadline for John Lyons at the moment, it's in October. So if you need any support with risk assessments or policies or a review, or somebody just to generally have a look and kind of see if everything's the way it should be, more than welcome to contact us, and we can have a chat about that, or arrange a meeting and go through those with you. But one of the key things that we found over the last 2 years is, because of the lack of funding and the small funds and grants that there are available, organisations are kind of having to pick up things that they haven't done before. And so therefore, what we're finding is that they don't have policies in place that they do need to have in place. The example is that if they were delivering at a really low level, and they weren't having a lot in, and it was very low level, what they've done is they've actually started to pick up more work and engage with a lot more young people, which means that you have to have certain policies in place. So when it comes to policies and procedures, there are main policies, set of policies that you must have in place when working with children and young people. Child protection is one of those, which is really, really key and important. Again, we're more than happy to help with child protection policies and support with those. You need to know the work that you do with children and young people, and to be able to implement that within your child protection policy, and we're more than happy to have a look over and see whether it's fit for purpose as well. You've also got things like code of conduct, which we found lots of groups hadn't had in place before. So pre-COVID, lots of groups were working face-to-face with young people. During COVID, what happened was lots of organisations just started to come online and deliver sessions online. But what they weren't looking at was how they were ensuring that young people were safe online. How do these young people know how to report concerns when they were using the internet? Particularly if it's related to project work. And also not knowing, that they had to abide by a certain procedures. So there was certain expectations of young people as well as staff and volunteers when they're working with young people online. So a code of conduct is really, really good to have. And what it does, it clearly defines what participants as well as volunteers and staff members need to do in order to ensure that they're complying with the organisation's guidelines and sticking to clear guidelines as well. And they've got something to fall back on if they're unsure as well. The other thing is safer recruitment. So if you're having to up the numbers of volunteers or staff that you're having to recruit because you've got a grant in, and it means that you've got to recruit somebody or bring more volunteers in, are you recruiting safely? Are you doing the necessary checks in terms of disclosure and barring checks? If it's old members of staff, have you actually checked that their DBS, when their last DBS was checked and when it needs to be reviewed again? Because once you've done a DBS check, good practice really is to review that every 3 years. And with the update service at the moment, you can do that a lot sooner and a lot quicker online as well. So there are several things around safer recruitment and ensuring that happens when you're recruiting volunteers and staff as well. And then you've got the health and safety policy, which links in really well with your risk assessment. So during COVID, we've had regulation changes and government guidance change on quite a regular basis. And what we found with groups that we work with is that actually they haven't updated their policies to reflect the COVID period. They've just continued to deliver. And then when where they have changed and updated in with regards to COVID, they haven't looked at the latest legislation and guidance from the government. So over the last few months, we've had a change in guidance as well. So that would need to be reflected in your health and safety as well as your risk assessment. And any new links to those government guidances would need to be added in. Now, risk assessments are really generally an area which really scares a lot of people. And in the work we've done in the last year and a half, 2 years, what we found is organisations don't quite understand risk assessments really well. And you don't have to have reams and reams of writing in risk assessments, but what you do need to have is key areas in there, but links to your existing policies, which will help you to be able to identify what you actually do if there are concerns, say around safeguarding or child protection, if there are concerns about other areas, there's information within that risk assessment which links to a document, rather than putting all that information from the document to risk assessment, which would make your risk assessment really, really long. The links actually shorten the document, but provide the precise information you need when completing risk assessments. The other issue with risk assessments is that they should be reviewed regularly. Remember, all these documents are live working documents, particularly during the pandemic period when things are changing quite regularly. You need to check that they're fit for purpose when you do review them. So an example of a review date may be 3 months or 6 months, and it's not going to be your traditional annual review. So it may be sooner. So if legislation changes sooner, then your review is a lot sooner than it would initially need to be. And those review documents need to reflect those dates and make sure that everybody's clear on that. Now, when it comes to risk assessments, the other really key important thing is those who are running activities need to be part of those risk assessments. They need to be able to identify concerns that may turn up during that period of time. But also, there is also an issue around ensuring that those who are running activities have actually read and understood the risk assessment, which we found that, lots of people, organizations create these risk assessments. They don't share it with the people delivering the session. And then when there's an issue, it's acknowledged that the risk assessment actually wasn't shared and they didn't understand what their responsibilities were. So sharing these documents is really, really important and key when it comes to the work. You've also got confidentiality and data protection. So if you're working with children and young people, it's really important that you have something in writing around confidentiality and data protection. And then you've got complaints and the grievances as well, and bullying. When it comes to working with young people, you may have issues around bullying. So there should be some sort of guidance around bullying through a policy and procedure. It can be included in your safeguarding policy, but as long as it's there to enable staff and volunteers to be able to understand what they should do if there are concerns about bullying as well. Some of the other key things that we found during the last 2 years while managing risk assessments was that people thought that safeguarding is completely separate from a risk assessment, but it's actually part of your risk assessment. Safeguarding works hand in hand with your risk assessment. And some of the examples that I can actually give you are around considering whether during the pandemic, if you've changed the way you deliver, whether that's online delivery or change the venue because you need to ensure there's social distancing within those venues. What you need to look at is, does that affect your risk assessment? Do your policies need to, and health and safety guidance need to be updated in line with that? Has that been done? Has that been checked? And the easiest way to do this is to create a task log. And the task log would allow you to put down all the areas that you need to work on and put dates and timeframes and actually allocate it to people within the organization so it's done. And it helps you to kind of monitor things really well as well. Making sure that COVID risk assessments reflect changes that government rewording is really, really important. So make sure when you do word risk assessments and policies that it's not so narrow that you get stuck where you have to constantly change the phrases or that you put into these policies or risk assessments. Make the phrases as wide enough to cover the majority of things that you deliver, but not so wide that it's not very clear as to what you're covering as well. So an example will be updating your latest links and saying, right, this is the information from August to September 2021. And the last update would have been maybe July, April time. So as soon as there's an update, making sure the links are up to date and they're available for everybody to see as well. Do all staff and volunteers have appropriate training, including safeguarding training? If first aid is needed, do they have first aid? I know during the COVID period that first aid was extended for people to be able to still continue to use that because it was very difficult to get face-to-face first aid training. That's changed. So are people's training is up to date? Are they required to go and have another check for vetting through disclosure and barring service because they've had a 6-month gap because no real activities have happened and they've not been in work? So has that been done? And it's really important that you factor that in. Is everybody clear about their own responsibilities? And what to do if there are concerns around safeguarding within the organisation, and that includes your volunteers too. That should be clearly stated in your policies. All staff should have access to your policies, and so they should be very clear about what they should do if there are concerns about safeguarding within your organisation. is there a right level of supervision in place for groups? So are the correct ratios for children under a certain age? The ratios are slightly higher. As children get older, the ratios are slightly lower. Have you got the correct ratios when delivering services to children and young people? So some of those things are things that we find people haven't considered, and they've decided to book on 30 8-year-olds and then found that actually they've only got 2 members of staff, and that's not adequate for the number of children that they've got going on. So it's very important that ratios are looked at. And again, you can get support from us with regards to ratios if you're not sure about ratios. And there's guidance that we can provide you through the Green Book where the ratios are clearly stated as well. What facilities are available? So if you've moved to larger premises or are hiring or using larger premises, you'll need to risk assess those premises. If it's not your normal premises that you're using. Again, even your usual premises need to be risk assessed during the COVID period to reflect any risks that may be an issue during this pandemic period as well. Will the location be accessible to the public is another area that you need to consider when delivering activities. If so, what risk does it pose in terms of safeguarding and COVID? Remember, you could have people coming in and out and not necessarily showing symptoms of COVID, but may actually be positive, and they may lead to illnesses or people getting sick within your activities as well. The other issue that we've had is people not really understanding the way that they should report concerns. So if there is an issue around safeguarding, and there needs to be a safeguarding lead within the organisation who's able to pick up and clarify issues and provide support as well. And when it comes to the actual risk assessment, you will need to look at your entry and exit points within that risk assessment, hand sanitizing facilities, but also what happens if somebody becomes unwell on site and tests positive to COVID? What's the process and procedure within your organisation? If somebody who may turn up without symptoms, as I said, who's positive, and you then are informed that that happens, does that mean that you need to have your premises cleaned before anybody can access it? Does everybody have to have time out? So is it 10 or 14 days that they have to have go into isolation before they can come in? So all these things are things that you've got to consider. Will staff or volunteers be doing lateral flow tests before they turn up for activities? If so, is it a regular thing? And how is this recorded in terms of ensuring that you know if somebody has carried out a test, and if they're positive, what happens to them? What will they be doing? Will they be going into isolation? And how do you manage other people as well within that group as well? Just making sure you've got adequate staffing, but also able to protect the people that you're actually working with. So your volunteers, your members, your participants within that group. The other thing that's really, really important that we've come across during this period is insurance. Lots of people haven't been making sure that their insurances are valid. So where they've been running activities prior to this, and maybe they've not been running so much because of COVID, or the premises not been used, sometimes what happens is groups overlook their policy renewal and miss that. And what happens is when they apply for funding, they then realise that actually our insurance is out of date, or it doesn't cover us for the work we're doing. So that we've changed the way we work, or we're accessing far higher numbers of people, and the insurance doesn't actually cover the numbers that we need. So there are issues where you might need to have a discussion with your insurance brokers and talk to them about changes in the way that you deliver. And also, if you are delivering to a much larger number of audience than you have previously stated and been covered for through insurance, it's important that you have that discussion with your insurers and make sure that you are covered to an adequate level. And we've had to do that a couple of times during the pandemic period, where we've had to up our insurance to cover other activities that we've done. So it's important that you're aware of that, and somebody is looking into that at all points as well. The other thing that's really important is that you can get a lot of help and advice around and webinars actually around coronavirus through the period. So NCBO are providing a lot of guidance during this period for groups, and it makes it a lot easier for groups to be able to access and understand what the procedures are. Although risk assessments and health and safety do feel quite daunting and safeguarding, once you've got very simple, straightforward procedures in place, it does make it a lot easier to be able to follow and comply with them. The problem is when you don't have simple, straightforward procedures and they're complicated, and you've taken somebody's template, not fully understanding what's in there, it can make it very difficult for you to do so. The other thing that we've had during COVID is that some procedures are actually reviewed a lot sooner, particularly safeguarding procedures. They can be reviewed a lot sooner than annually, which is the recommended period for safeguarding procedures. So you can review those every 6 months, or as and when something happens prior to the renewal date. To finish off, what I'm really going to say is that if you need any policy and procedure support, please feel free to come to us. We will send you the email address, and you can contact us at Voluntary Action Harrow, and we'll be more than happy to help you. If you need to renew and review DBSs and safeguarding training, please come to us as well. More than happy to do that, similarly with the risk assessments. Now, if you've got any questions from what you've heard me say today around policy, please put it in the chat or the Q&A, and what we'll do is we'll try and ensure that we cover it at the next session as well if we haven't covered it today, and we'll try and get you as much information as possible that you need.
Thanks, Asia. Okay, so you do have the Q&A function, so please, if there is any questions, please put them in there. Again, if you'd like to send us any questions directly, and there are some already in there, so I will answer them in 1 minute. But let us know. The webinar that Asia just talked about, so I think I mentioned it at the beginning, we are planning on doing a webinar in partnership with Asia, maybe a couple of local charities that have been spending a lot of time on policy recently, just reviewing some of the major ones like safeguarding, health and safety, looking at reviewing risk assessment templates. And we're going to do something that is in quite a lot of detail to help any organisation that might just need that support. So that will be coming soon, and Glenys will be sending that out as soon as that's been created. But this today was just more specifically about this funding. So having a look at these questions, so we have a couple. Helen, so this is St. Peter's, I'm assuming. I think what we're working on is the last 4 years. So if you haven't had a large grant off them in the last 4 years, we've got that detail of who has and who hasn't, then we would class you haven't. If you're really unsure if you haven't had one in the last 4 years, then by all means, please email Glenys and she'll be able to tell you if you've had one in the last 4 years, because we have that list from John Lyons. So hopefully that helps. Tracy, you were asking about, you have just applied for a main grant. Well, if you haven't been successful yet, then you are more than welcome to apply and to hopefully get a grant off this. John Lyons are using this as an opportunity to get to know organisations. Just so everyone's aware, John Lyons are so backed up at the moment. If you haven't had a sign off from your original from a first stage letter, you aren't. Then their next funding round that is even possible is next April. That's how backlogged they are, because they're so overwhelmed with the amount of applications they're trying to get. So this is a way of getting to know some of those organisations that might be getting a grant soon, and they can kind of connect in a new way. So yes, as long as you haven't currently just got a grant or have just received one in the last 4 years, and we're talking main grants, not small grants, then by all means apply to this. And again, you can apply anyway, because there may be different circumstances that we think what you're asking for is still vitally needed. Does Petchy Awards count as YHF funding? Yes, any grant that we have given you would class as YHF funding, because we have to do some basic due diligence to give you a grant. And that includes things like your bank account is your organisation, not a personal one. It includes reviewing your trustee and making sure there's no conflict of interests and things like that. So if you've had any funding from us for any reason, then yes, you can tick yes on that. Ashley, do the activities need to be delivered face-to-face, or can they be delivered online? This funding is specifically about, I would say our fight for this was about COVID recovery and engaging young people in the best and most appropriate way for them to overcome and come out of COVID as strong as possible. If your service or activity needs to be online, and it's quite clear why it needs to be online, then yes, that is fine. You can apply for that. If there's a blended approach, you'd like to be there and you'd like to have the option to be able to do both, then that's also fine. And if you need it to be face-to-face because you really feel you want to be engaging with young people face-to-face, then obviously we definitely want to support that as well. So like you, we can't predict what the future holds around COVID. We don't know if we're going to see any lockdowns. So be aware that we will work with you whatever the next 6. So if you're successful and then we go into another lockdown, we will be working with you to find out how you can use the funding most appropriately to support children and young people. We won't be holding anyone over the coals to make you do something that there was no way you could predict the change. But what we are looking for, and the panel definitely will be looking for, is does this activity support children and young people that need it? And over the next 6 months, it could make a real difference to their lives. So hopefully that answers, Ashley, your first question. Say your project costs are 6,000. Can we apply for 5,000 towards that? Yes. So the question is, if the program costs 6,000, can you apply for 5,000? Yes, absolutely fine. Again, be specific in what that 6,000 breaks up and how that breaks down. But that's exactly right. You could do that. I would, in any of the notes section, just say how you're going to fund the last 1,000, because we do see that quite a lot in panels where people have said how much this thing costs, but haven't clarified how they're going to cover those extra costs. And as a funder, one of our issues or worries is that if they don't get that extra funding, does that mean this just doesn't happen, even if they were successful with our part? So just be clear how that funding is going to be, the difference will be covered from another source. Can we apply for funding to support parents, families with GLC grants? So this has been so John Lyons Charity have started to give more support for parents, but if the grants that get in are, so the answer is yes, you can apply for parenting support. But our worry is if we get too many grants in, and the panel will be specifically wanting to support children in the best way possible, then obviously families, you'd have to have a really good argument how a direct support to children and young people, the parent support need to be more important than the direct support to children and young people. But please work with us on it. If it's really clear what you're doing and why you're doing it, then yes, that is possible. It's not that it's not possible, but it's more about, depending on how many applications come in, that's where we would suggest, obviously, if we're oversubscribed, children and young people direct support will probably be preference, especially knowing who's on the panel from people like John Lyons. They like to fund direct engagement with young people, but they have recently been funding more parenting support. So I'm sorry, Helen, I'm not giving you a really specific answer there. And it's just hard to give that, not knowing the context of what you might be applying for. Okay, a couple more. So what's our level of monitoring? Do you have to have receipts? So depending on what you apply for, depends on your receipt. So if, for instance, I don't think we ever ask for a copy of the receipts, but if, for instance, you were applying for activities that were going to cost a specific amount, I don't know, days out to Thorpe Park or something like that. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. We would need to know exactly what is the cost of that in your budget, and your expenditure should be very itemized depending on what you've asked for there. In your general monitoring, we try to be as relaxed as possible. So we only ask you for one monitoring, and that's the end of the period. And it normally correlates against your application. So if we've asked you a question in your application, your monitoring and evaluation will have so for instance, describe your project. In the monitoring and evaluation will be, tell us how the project went. Your expenditure will correlate with your budget in your application. So if you said you want this amount for salaries, we'd want to see what was the cost and salaries and how did you come to that expenditure. So hopefully that answers the question around budgets. I'm just going to quickly check the chat function to make sure I've not missed anything there. So yes, it would be Keisha. So the best thing to do, just because of COVID, obviously we are in offices, but people aren't always in all the time. The best thing to do is if you've got a question on the application, you've got that email, or you can directly email Keisha directly, and that's on our website, her email address. You can just email her and say, would I be able to have a quick chat with you? And so then she'll be able to confirm when that chat can happen. Because there you go, it's in the chat. Copy that across. If you'd like to have a chat with Keisha, then email her and she'll arrange that chat with you. So will this grant be available for resuming weekly sporting activities? Yes. So physical activity is one of the areas that we want to support. So if it is supporting some weekly activities to sport, then yes, you definitely could apply for that. The funding can be either for brand new stuff or for things that you've been doing for years. We're not against either of those two things. If it's for stuff that you are already delivering, then what we probably would want to be clear is what are we paying for compared to what other people are paying for. And so if that wasn't clear in your application, we may come back and ask you more about that, but you can apply for either. Just quickly going through this. So someone had a grant 4 years ago. Can we still apply? Yes, as long as it was over 4 years ago, that's absolutely fine. So please go ahead and do that. Again, anyone can apply for this. John Lyons is on the panel, and so we are going to be. So okay, so it finished 6 months ago. That would class that your grant was 6 months old, not 4 years old, unfortunately. But you can still apply. We just have to give priority to those that haven't received a grant either in the last 4 years or have never received a grant off JLC. But because of the size, so as an organisation, you have to be under £250,000. That does limit quite a lot of organisations from applying to this grant. So if you think you've got something that fits well with it, then still apply, because hopefully the application isn't that hard for you. Cabdul, if you want to email Glenys, you've asked how we're not quite sure if we have had a main grant off John Lyons. If you email Glenys and ask, she will confirm with you directly. And I think that's all the things covered in the Q&A and the chat. So,
and there is one.
Sorry.
I'm not sure you've answered yet.
Go.
It's just from Olivia. She said, "What's the permissible ratio between activity and staff costs?" I know you mentioned overheads.
So there is no ratio that we are putting on that. You need to decide that yourselves. So some of our funding, we do put a ratio on. For this, we're not. Because it might be, for instance, we know some organizations have been successful with some funding to either have the people but don't have the resources to deliver, or the rent, or something like that. Or sometimes the other way around, people have been able to secure like rent and resources but don't have money to pay staff. So whatever your need is, we're allowing you to say it. So if you want to put 100% on one of those lines, you can. You don't have to put things in the other expenditure lines. You just need to clarify why that is. So for instance, if you only apply for kind of staff time, we'd want to see somewhere how are you going to have activities? Where are those costs going to come from? And how are you going to make sure that it's not just people there, but there's costs there to be able to deliver? I hope that is that clear, Keisha, would you say?
Yeah, I think that's clear.
Great. Olivia, I think you asked a question and you said thank you. So hopefully that was clear, at least to yourself. Well, the great news is I'm able to give everyone 10 minutes back of your life, so you can have a cup of tea probably before your next Zoom or next meeting you're running into, or even getting in front of young people. Anything you need from us, please email Keisha. If you want to specifically find out more about your JLC and whether you've got that, then email Glenys so she can help you confirm that. And we will be in touch really soon about the webinar to help anyone. And thank you, Asia. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just giving us a bit of an oversight on what you've seen. So Thank you everyone for joining us. We'll get this recording out to you in case you, for some reason, missed anything, and we'll get it to all the other members. Hopefully we'll be able to give all of you a kind of small grant through this. We have another grants round opening in January that will be for everyone. And we have more HAF funding for Christmas in case you decided not to do anything this summer, but you would like to deliver some activities over Christmas. Lovely to see you all. Keisha, Asia, anything you'd like to finish with?
Just to get them in 11th of October, and please get them in slightly earlier just so I can help you. But I look forward to seeing your applications. And yeah, I'm here to help if you need anything.
Yeah, similarly, if anybody needs any support or help, more than happy to help. It'd be lovely to see everybody again. Haven't seen everybody for a while, especially because of lockdown. So take care, everybody, and we'll be in touch.
See everyone soon. Thank you all for coming, and good luck.